Hello, welcome to Spread Book Joy. Today I am talking about Welcome to St. Hell, my trans teen misadventure by Lewis Hancox. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack, and if you're not new, welcome back. Normally I'd hold the book up for the whole video because I like to promote the author's work, but this is really heavy and it hurt my wrists, so this is the second time I'm filming it. So, what is this book? It is a graphic memoir all about the life of Lewis Hancox, the author, illustrator, and apparently trans influencer who I will now be following. He apparently has a YouTube channel over here, which I will link in the description box below. And I don't like to review memoirs or biographies. I don't call them reviews because I'm not going to pass judgment on someone's life story or aspect of their life that they've talked about, but I am going to recommend this book and discuss it. It is a really important book, and I think one that will have a lot of impact, and I think it's one that if you haven't read many trans life experiences, it is well worth picking up. It is aimed at younger readers. It was shortlisted for the Waterstones Children's Book of the Year. It was a finalist in the older readers category, and it's recommended because there is adult content. It's recommended for ages 14 up, so I would say 14 plus for anyone who I think 14 plus for me personally is fine. I know some parents might want to read it before letting their 14-year-olds read it. If a child is 16 and above, I think they're perfectly legitimate reasons for reading this. It's fine. There is discussion of sex and puberty and things like that, so if you're 14 you're going to know these things anyway, but I just think it was a really marvellous book. So why did I think that? Well, it gave me a real insight into this trans man's story and his experience growing up trans in a small town in England in the 90s and the early 2000s, and things have come a long way since then, but obviously not far enough. But in comparison to what Lewis went through, not even knowing what transgender was and feeling this gender dysphoria and not knowing that that was a thing, not knowing that all of these feelings and emotions and negative feelings that he had towards his body and himself as a person, and just trying to figure things out. I think it just beautifully illustrated, and it is an illustrated book, but you know, it told this in a real way where I felt like I was talking with a friend. Lewis, the older Lewis, this device that he uses where older Lewis talks to young Lois, was, I thought, really, really effective and just engaging. And he's just sort of telling his story about growing up and being born female as an only child in like to his parents, who then split up when he was about, I think he was about 9 or 10 when they split up, and the effect of that on him, and then feeling that he didn't want to do girly things, and then not liking his body when he starts to go through puberty, and all of the associated trauma that comes with that was dealt with in a really humorous but not dismissive way. So it was really well done. I think it's the best example I can say of talking about really triggering and traumatic things, but in a way that was really straightforward. And I can see why this is a finalist for Waterstones Children's Book of the Year, because I think it was just a great example of how to tell the truth in a palatable way. So yeah, there were some traumatic things explored, which I'm going to talk about in the spoilers section. If you want to know the trigger warnings without going into the spoilers, I will put the trigger warnings at the very bottom of my description box, because I know a lot of people don't like to hear them because they can be deemed as spoilers. But if you want to know what the trigger warnings are, and there are quite a few for this book, then I would look in the description box below, unless you want to watch the spoilers section where I discuss my thoughts on the book with in depth. So yeah, I'm going to put the book back down again because it is actually really, really heavy. I read it in an afternoon. It is a really nice just read that you can do in an afternoon. But yes, so here's my spoiler warnings for this section. So Lewis was born Lois and decides to go through this phase when he's in his, I think he's sort of pre-teens, like tween age we call it now, but back then it wasn't called that at all, of dressing really like being like a tomboy, what people call a tomboy, hanging out with boys and being a skater and an emo and that kind of thing. And he goes to secondary school and rapidly realizes that the peer pressure and the bullying and the judgment that you get when you're in secondary school and when you're a teenager means that he desperately wants to fit in. So he goes through a phase of trying to be what he calls a real girl. And within this, even though he thinks he wants to be a real girl, whatever real girl might mean, which is just awful, he decides that he wants to be, doesn't want to have boobs, or doesn't want to have hips or a shape or a feminine shape, and so starts to do what a lot of people end up doing, which is trying to control the situation through changing his body shape through food, and develops an eating disorder, quite a serious eating disorder, and he's really pleased when his periods stop and things like that. And then when the eating disorder actually hospitalises him, he then later on decides, well, actually I'll change my body shape in a healthy way, which just replaces one obsession with another when he thinks is a healthy way, which is to work out and to put on muscle mass and build up his body so that it doesn't become this curvy body, but becomes this kind of like bulked out on top body. And he just obsesses about exercise, and again it becomes another really unhealthy way of controlling how he looks or how he feels about his body. And then he goes through a stage of thinking that he might be a lesbian because he's not attracted to men or boys, but then discovers that in his first sexual encounter with his first girlfriend that he doesn't want her touching his female bits. So again, this like trying to discover what he is. And at the time, the terms transgender and people's knowledge about it were not as prevalent as they are now. And it's books like this that I think, if I just think about, young Lewis, if he'd found a book like this, would have felt far less alone and confused. So I think this is a really important and impactful book, and I absolutely loved it. And I really think Lewis Hancox is going to become, if he puts anything else out, I'm going to be definitely looking for it in future. I loved his illustration style, I loved his family and the way they were portrayed, because one thing for a trans memoir that Lewis didn't go through in a traumatic sense. I mean, it was really awful to have to tell your parents these things. I think the anxiety and the build-up of all of that. First he came out as gay, and then he came out as a trans man. It must have been really anxiety-inducing and traumatic at the time. But his parents, if they didn't react initially in a positive way, he gives them a space within the book to explain why that was, because his parents then do go on to be incredibly supportive, and so do his grandparents and his best friends. So he gives each of them a bit of space within the book to explain why they might have reacted in the way they did. And I thought that was really sweet, and I thought it just drove home the idea that actually, even if your initial thoughts are shock, if you discover that one of your loved ones is trans, if they come and tell you that they're trans and tell you about their identity, that actually you can change that, you can turn that around, and you can be positive and supportive. So I just thought the whole memoir was wonderful, and I'd highly recommend it. If you are considering buying it for younger readers, like I said, it's got the age of 14 plus. Recommended, and that is with the caveat that there are discussions about body image, gender dysphoria, eating disorders, homophobia, transphobia, and all sorts of issues. And there is sex featured in the book, and bullying and harassment are in here. So there's just the full range of things that you could be triggered over are within this book. At the same time, it's really hopeful. It's just a really, really hopeful book. So this is why when I say about giving trigger warnings, I think these things are in here, but the book ultimately is an important one. It's a hopeful one. It's funny, it's sweet, it's uplifting in so many ways, and I absolutely loved it. So have you read it? Are you thinking of reading it? Let me know in the comments below. Have you got any other really excellent memoirs, graphic memoirs or trans memoirs you'd recommend? It doesn't have to be a trans memoir, but a graphic memoir. I just thought this was wonderful and a really great way to kick off People April and Trans Girl April. You can also just drop me an emoji in the comments to let me know you were here, and hopefully I'll see you again here soon. Bye!